a group of 33,000. Not quite, more than 5,000, of course. And there was bread to feed us all, communion on that Sunday morning. They had quite a system for that. But there was the main point, some of the points in the speeches that were given, other than anti-bullying and bringing down walls between people and seeing people for who they are instead of their skin color and everything else, was to say that you can make a difference. I think every speaker that was there said, you can make a difference. And they had a kid who was 18 who was at the assembly 3 years ago, and he shared that he was excited when he left the assembly 3 years ago, and he wanted to make a difference, and somehow it petered out, and his enthusiasm went down. But then he began to do subtle things, small things in his daily life, in his classes, in his work after school, just small things. And he found that as time went on, those small things made a big difference. Small, subtle things. 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old kids, and even younger, can make a difference. And that was what was trying to be conveyed to these kids in this Superdome stadium, that you can make a difference. And you do make a difference. Part of it is for you to be able to see that. And, as we as adults have a hard time seeing that too, the difference we make, until sometimes it's too late, and then we just don't realize the impact we make. There was a youth director who went to camp with his confirmation kids, and all the kids were inside having a party, and there's one kid missing. So the youth director went looking around. He went back into the bus, and there was this kid in tears. His favorite aunt had just passed away a few days ago, and he was heartbroken. The youth director didn't know what to do. So what did they do? They sat and cried with this kid, this 13-year-old kid, sat and cried with him. Nothing major, nothing big. And when they're ready, he said, you can come back in when you're ready. I just want to make sure that you have your time to grieve, but I'll be back inside, and you come back in when you're ready. So after about 10 minutes, the kid came back inside. What difference does it make? 20 years later, the kid said, I remember, to this youth director, I remember that time you sat and cried with me. It was a small thing. It made a world of difference to this kid. Jesus is among the crowds. And for one thing, I'm trying to think, well, didn't they plan for this? They must have been caught up in the moment, because my wife would have had snacks packed, water, juice, bananas, everything else packed for this outing. So it was an unexpected thing that people just sat riveted, listening to Jesus, what he had to say. And after a while, they're like, oh, man, I'm kind of hungry. They notice that the crowd's getting milling around, getting a little hungry. And John is the only gospel, if you notice, that where they have a boy come up. I've got something. I've got 2 fish, 5 loaves of bread. What is that going to do? Kid was just a kid. What did he have to offer this crowd, this whole scenario? He finds out he had a lot to give. His willingness, for one thing, to share with what he had. Probably taking this stuff home to his family. But he, too, was probably caught up in the moment. This grace-filled moment that you just can't seem to break your attention away from. And so Jesus takes this small pittance of food and looks out over the crowd, and somehow it's enough. More than enough for those who are sitting there. They've had their fill, and there's even things left over. The small and subtle in our lives can creep up and make a world of difference. Sometimes we can't see it, but we can certainly feel it when it's been done for us or to us. Jesus often works in small, subtle ways. They wanted to make him king. They wanted to overthrow Herod and make Jesus their king. That's not how he operated. That was not his job description when he came to this world. It was something smaller, something more subtle than that. His whole ministry was of subtlety, of seemingly small things. even on his death, carrying his own cross, dying all alone, small, subtle. But we know the difference it makes for us, for those disciples who followed him, and finally got the clue that this is the way Jesus wanted things to happen. Not big, extravagant ways, but the small, subtle, everyday kind of mundane things that just kind of add up and add up and add up. The disciples had no idea that they were going to end up being leaders of a church, of something new, something freeing, something that was beyond what they could think of. Jesus knew what to do with this small pittance of food. And the disciples watched because they'd see him do extravagant things before, amazing things. Something simple to something amazing. To feed people. Feed people the bread. And we feed people all the time. We try to feed and help people all the time in our small, subtle ways. We work behind the scenes because that's where a lot of us are comfortable working. But it all makes a big difference. Jesus comes to all of us in small and subtle ways, tugging at our heartstrings. Do you think I wanted to be a pastor? I've been avoiding it for 25 years. I don't like to get up in front of people and talk. I'm an introvert. I'm shy. I like to be behind the scenes, but poke, 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 poke. You're going to go to seminary. You're going to do something that you haven't expected you're ever going to do before. I'm going to make it uncomfortable for you at times. I have these things I'm natural at. I'm natural to just sit and talk with people. I'm unnatural standing up here in front of people. That's unnatural, but it's that subtle poking. And I know that you've all felt that poking to do something that you're not quite used to doing, but God is kind of directing you to do certain things. It may be unnatural at first, but as time goes on, it becomes more and more natural. And you feel that God's grace coming more and more as you step into the role of something that you least expected to do. God has a way of changing you, of changing the bread and the fish to make more abundance, overabundance. Yesterday at the wedding, I was talking about the wedding at Cana. 6 of those big 20-gallon jugs. Fill them up with water. They turn to wine. They have 120 gallons of wine for this wedding feast. Well, that's quite an overabundance, don't you think? And that represents the grace that Jesus continues to give us more and more and more. Not just a little here and there like pixie dust on our lives, but just flooding us. In New Orleans, we had, 8 inches of rain in one day? They said, don't go out because we have flash flood. It's kind of like that. We get a flash flood of grace when we least expect it. Jesus works sometimes in very subtle ways, small ways, with big, big impact. We feel it in our lives. We know it's there. We sense it. Sometimes we're able to grab onto it and identify it and go with it. And that's a great thing. But it's there for us. This whole scenario that Jesus gives of the feeding of the 5,000+ shows us that the smallest can be a big thing. Amen.